My brother ruined my childhood, then stole my wife. Now he. Growing up, I always knew something was off, but I didn't fully understand it until much later. My name is Evan, and I have a younger brother, Nick. From the outside, we probably looked like a regular family, 2 boys, a mom and dad, and a seemingly nice suburban life. But inside our house, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Nick was the golden child, the favorite. And I was just there. It started early. Nick could do no wrong. If he made a mess, I was the one told to clean it up. If he threw a tantrum, I was the one scolded for setting him off. My parents doted on him, while I felt like an afterthought. Birthdays, Christmas, even just regular days, it was always about Nick. When I got an A on a test, my parents would nod, barely paying attention. When Nick managed to pass with a C, they'd throw him a little party. At first, I thought this was just normal. Maybe all parents played favorites a little. But it became clear that this was different. Nick wasn't just spoiled, he was cruel. When I was 6 and he was 4, he broke one of my favorite toys, a small wooden race car my grandpa had given me. He looked me dead in the eyes as he smashed it against the floor, and then ran to our mom, screaming that I had hit him. I hadn't even touched him, but she didn't question it. She hugged him, kissed his forehead, and turned to me with that cold, disappointed stare. "Why do you have to be so mean to your little brother, Evan?" I tried to tell them. I tried to explain that Nick was lying, but they wouldn't hear it. It was easier for them to believe that their older son was the problem than to accept that their sweet little golden child was anything but perfect. And that was just the beginning. Nick got bolder as we got older. He'd take my things and destroy them for fun. If I got a new book, he'd rip the pages. If I saved up money for something I wanted, he'd find a way to steal it or break it before I could use it. It wasn't enough for him to have more attention, more praise, he wanted to see me miserable. But the worst part? He'd always find a way to make it look like I was at fault. He had this way of twisting things, making himself look like the innocent one. He'd cry on cue, tell our parents that I was bullying him, and they would buy it every single time. When I was 10, I got a new bike for my birthday. I loved that bike, it was the first thing that had ever felt like mine. I spent weeks saving up for a special set of stickers to decorate it, and I'd ride it every chance I got. One afternoon, I came home to find it in pieces. The tires were slashed, the frame bent, the chain completely missing. Nick was standing there, grinning. When I lost it, when I finally, after years of taking his abuse, shoved him, he screamed like I had broken his arm. My mom came running, saw me standing over him, and didn't even ask what had happened. She grounded me for a month. Nick got ice cream that night. I started spending more time alone, avoiding him as much as I could. But he always found new ways to mess with me. One time, when I was 12, I woke up to the smell of something burning. My heart stopped when I realized it was my own hair. Nick had taken a lighter and held it near my head while I slept. The ends of my hair were singed, my pillow had a blackened spot, and he was laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. That was the first time my dad actually stepped in. Until then, he had been mostly indifferent. My mom was the one who defended Nick, and my dad, while he wasn't as openly biased, had always taken a boys will be boys approach to our fights. But when he saw my burned hair, he finally paid attention. He dragged Nick into the living room, demanding an explanation. Nick, ever the manipulator, started crying. It was an accident. I just wanted to see what would happen. I didn't mean to. For the first time in his life, my dad didn't buy it. He told Nick he was grounded for a month. My mom, of course, tried to argue, he's just a kid. He didn't know any better. But my dad stood firm. He even apologized to me, something I'd never heard from either of them before. That should have been the turning point, right? Wrong. Nick didn't take kindly to losing his free pass. If anything, he got worse. He became more careful, more calculated. He'd wait until our parents weren't around before pulling his stunt. He'd whisper things to me just to see me react, knowing that if I lashed out, he'd be the one who looked innocent. I started hating being at home. I spent as much time as possible out of the house, staying at friends' places, joining after-school activities, anything to avoid him. And I think my dad started to notice. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was watching Nick more closely. Then, one day everything changed. I was 14, Nick was 12. I was in my room, trying to do my homework, when I heard a loud crash downstairs. I rushed down to find my mom crying, holding a broken vase in her hands. Nick was standing next to her, looking smug as ever. "What happened?" I asked. "He broke it," Nick said, pointing at me. "He threw it at me." I hadn't even been in the room. But my mom, as always, believed him instantly. She turned to me, her face red with anger. "You are out of control, Evan. Go to your room. I can't even look at you right now." I felt that familiar burn of injustice, but before I could say anything, my dad spoke up. "That's enough." My mom looked at him, confused. "What?" "I know Evan didn't do it." Nick's face turned pale. "But..." "No," my dad cut him off. "I've been watching you, Nick. I've seen how you treat your brother. I let it slide for too long, but this was the last straw." For the first time in his life, Nick didn't have an excuse. He stammered, tried to fake tears, but my dad wasn't buying it. He told him he was done covering for him, done believing his lies. And my mom? She was furious, not at Nick, but at my dad. She accused him of turning against his own son, of playing favorite. That was the moment I realized something. Nick wasn't just the golden child. My mom needed him to be the golden child. She needed him to be perfect because that meant she wasn't a bad mother. Admitting the truth, that he was a manipulative, cruel little monster, would mean admitting she had failed. From that day on, things changed. My dad made an effort to be there for me more. He started standing up for me when my mom tried to blame me for things I hadn't done. Leaving home was like finally coming up for air after being underwater for years. The day I left for college, I didn't look back. My dad drove me to campus, helped me carry my bags into my dorm, and before he left, he pulled me aside. He wasn't an overly emotional guy, but I could tell he wanted to say something important. "Make a life for yourself, Evan," he said. "Don't let the past hold you back." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. For the first time, I was on my own. No Nick to sabotage me, no mother to twist things against me. Just me, a tiny dorm room, and the promise of something better. College was everything I had hoped for and more. I could finally be my own person without constantly watching my back. I made friends, threw myself into my classes, and joined a few clubs. It was the first time I ever felt free, like I could breathe without waiting for someone to pull the rug out from under me. No one there knew me as the kid who was always blamed, the one forced to clean up his brother's messes. I was just Evan. And then I met Lauren. She was different from anyone I had ever known. Where I had spent most of my life walking on eggshells, Lauren was fearless. She said what was on her mind, laughed easily, and had this way of making even the most ordinary moments feel exciting. We met in a philosophy class neither of us cared about, and somehow, within weeks, she was the most important person in my life. It started as a friendship. She dragged me to late-night diners when I was too caught up in studying, insisting that pancakes at midnight were a college rite of passage. I helped her with stats, even though she hated math with a passion. Somewhere along the way, things shifted. One night, we were sitting on the floor of her dorm room, listening to music when she looked at me and said, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me." And just like that, I was in love. It wasn't perfect. I had my baggage, my trust issues, and this deep-rooted fear that if I let myself be happy, something would come along to take it all away. But Lauren? She made me feel safe. She was the first person who ever made me believe that I was worth something, that I wasn't just the leftover child who never quite measured up. We had been together for a little over a year when she told me she was pregnant. I remember that moment so clearly. She sat me down, her hands shaking a little, and just said it. "I'm pregnant." At first, I couldn't breathe. Not because I was scared of being a dad, but because, for the first time in my life, I had something real, something I could call my own. I wasn't just escaping my past anymore, I was building a future. I looked at her, at this incredible woman who had somehow chosen me, and I knew there was only one thing to say. "Marry me." She laughed, thinking I was joking. But I wasn't. I didn't want to wait, didn't want to waste a second. I had spent too much of my life waiting for things to get better. This, Lauren, our baby, this was my better. We got married in a small courthouse ceremony with just a few close friends. I didn't invite my family. I didn't even tell them. For the first time in my life, I was free from them, and I wasn't going to let them taint this moment. Lauren and I built a life together, and for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to have a family. Not the kind that tears you down, but the kind that lifts you up. The kind that makes you want to be better, to do better. But of course, my past wasn't done with me just yet. Because when my mother found out about the baby, she called me for the first time in years. And she wasn't calling to congratulate me. For years, I believed I had escaped my past. I had built something solid, something real. Lauren and I had a life together, a daughter we adored, and a marriage that, to me, felt unshakable. I thought I had finally broken free from the toxic cycles of my childhood, that I had created the kind of family I had always dreamed of. But if life had taught me anything, it was that just when you start to feel safe, that's when the floor gets ripped out from under you. The first time she cheated, I didn't even see it coming. She had always been ambitious, throwing herself into her career with the same energy that had drawn me to her in the first place. I was proud of her, proud that she was making a name for herself in the corporate world while we balanced life as parents. Late nights at the office, networking events, weekend conferences. I never questioned any of it. Why would I? She was my wife, my best friend, the mother of my child. Then one night, I noticed she was acting off. She was quieter than usual, distant. I asked her if something was wrong, and at first, she brushed it off. Just work stress, she said, avoiding my eyes. But something in her tone, in the way she suddenly couldn't meet my gaze, made my stomach twist. I didn't push. I should have. But I didn't. A week later, she broke down and told me everything. It had happened with a coworker. A married one. They had been working late, things had gotten out of hand, and one bad decision had turned into something she couldn't take back. She cried, told me she hated herself, that it was a mistake, that she had never meant to hurt me. I couldn't even speak. I just sat there, feeling everything I had built start to crack. But I loved her. And I loved our daughter. So, I did what I had been conditioned to do my entire life. I swallowed the pain and told myself I could move past it. She begged for forgiveness, promised it would never happen again, and I believed her. I had to. Because the alternative, tearing our family apart, felt worse than anything she had done. For a while, things got better. She put in the effort, stayed home more, cut ties with the coworker. I told myself we were stronger for it, that we had survived the worst. But I was wrong. The second time, it was with her ex. It happened on a weekend when she was supposed to be visiting her sister. I found out through a text message I wasn't meant to see, one that popped up on her phone while she was in the shower. Just a single line, "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." I don't even remember standing up. I just remember my heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to be sick. When she came out of the bathroom, I was still staring at her phone, at those words that made my entire world tilt sideways. She saw my face, saw what I was looking at, and her expression crumbled. She didn't try to lie. She just started crying. "It didn't mean anything," she said, over and over, like those words would make it hurt less. I wanted to leave. I wanted to walk out the door and never look back. But then I thought of our daughter, of what it would mean for her, for our family. So I stayed. The third time, I didn't even react the way I thought I would. She was on a business trip. I had let my guard down, convinced myself that after everything, after nearly losing me twice, she would never do it again. Then, 2 weeks after she got back, a mutual friend, someone who had no idea about our past struggles, let it slip over drink. "Man, Lauren must have had a wild time in Chicago," he said casually. "Saw her at the hotel bar with some guy, looking real cozy." I didn't even flinch. I just nodded, took a sip of my beer, and let the words sink in. When I confronted her that night, she didn't deny it. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I love you, Evan. I love our family. I don't know why I keep ruining everything." And for some reason, that was what broke me. Not the cheating, not the lies, but the way she sounded so genuinely lost, like she didn't even understand herself. I had every reason to leave. Every reason to walk away and never look back. But I thought about our daughter, about how much I had wanted to give her the family I never had. So I forgave her. Again. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe it makes me a fool. But at the time, all I could see was the life we had built, the daughter who didn't deserve to grow up in a broken home. I told myself that love was enough. But I was wrong. I thought I had forgiven her for everything. I thought we had moved past the betrayals, past the affairs, past all the damage that had been done. I thought I had chosen my family, chosen to keep us together, chosen to be the bigger person. But nothing, could have prepared me for what she told me next. It happened on a Sunday evening. Our daughter had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up under her favorite blanket, her tiny hand still gripping the book we had been reading together. I remember looking at her and feeling that overwhelming rush of love, that certainty that no matter what had happened between Lauren and me, this little girl was the reason I stayed. Lauren was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. She looked pale, like she hadn't slept in days. I assumed it was just the weight of everything we had been through, the strain of rebuilding after all the lies, all the broken trust. But then she spoke. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I set my glass down and studied her face. I had seen her guilty before. I had seen her regretful, seen her ashamed. But this was different. This wasn't just guilt. This was fear. "Just say it," I told her, already bracing myself for whatever was coming. She took a deep breath, staring down at the table as she spoke. I don't know if she's yours. For a moment, I didn't understand what she meant. The words didn't register, didn't make sense in my head. I sat there, staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. Then the room tilted. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt my heart start to hammer against my ribs. What the hell are you talking about? My voice was calm, too calm, like my brain was still refusing to accept what she was saying. Lauren's fingers tightened around the mug. She hesitated, swallowing hard. I was with someone else before we got married. Before I found out I was pregnant. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the floor. Who? She didn't answer right away. And in that pause, that single moment of hesitation, I knew. I knew before she even said it. But I needed to hear it. Nick. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Nick. My brother. The same brother who had tormented me my entire childhood. The same brother who had manipulated, lied, and destroyed everything he touched. The same brother who had spent years making my life miserable, and now, apparently, had been sleeping with my wife. My throat felt tight, my pulse roaring in my ears. How long? Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I needed the truth, all of it. We started before you and I got together, she admitted. It wasn't serious, but it happened. And after we got engaged, she let out a shaky breath. It didn't stop. I had thought I had heard it all. I had thought nothing could shock me anymore, not after everything she had done, not after the affairs, the lies, the betrayals. But this? This was something else entirely. How long? I asked again, my voice low, dangerous. Her hands trembled as she set down the mug. Off and on, until a few years ago. I felt sick. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. Years. Years of lies. Years of betrayal. And all that time I had been blind. I had believed her when she said she loved me, believed her when she told me I was the only one. I had built a life with her, raised a child, our child, or at least, the child I had thought was mine. I stood up so fast my chair nearly toppled over. And you're telling me this now? After everything? After I forgave you, after I stayed? Tears streaked down her face, but I didn't care. I had nothing left to give. I didn't know how to tell you, she whispered. I didn't want to lose you. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You lost me the second you touched him. The reality of it hit me all at once. The stolen moments, the secret rendezvous, the lies whispered between them while I sat at home, completely unaware. And worst of all, the little girl sleeping in the next room, the child I had spent years loving, raising, believing was mine. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice steady. Does he know? Lauren hesitated. I don't think so. I didn't believe her. Not anymore. I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter just to keep myself upright. My world had been shattered, every piece of my past and future ripped apart in a single moment. And the worst part? The worst part was that through it all I had fought to protect my family. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own pride, all to keep us together. And now, none of it had been real. After Lauren's confession, I spent the night in my car. I couldn't stay in that house, not with her, not with the weight of everything crushing down on me. I barely slept. I just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to process the fact that the little girl I had spent years raising, the one I had stayed for, might not even be mine. By the next morning, I knew there was only one thing left to do. I needed answers. I made an appointment for a paternity test that same day. Lauren didn't fight me on it. She just sat there, hollow-eyed and exhausted, as I told her what was going to happen. I barely recognized her. The woman I had once loved, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, was now just a stranger sitting in my kitchen. The 2 weeks waiting for the results were the longest of my life. I went through every emotion, rage, grief, numbness. I tried to convince myself that it wouldn't change anything, that even if the worst was true, I had still been her father in every way that mattered. But deep down, I knew better. The truth was a wildfire, and once it burned through everything, there would be no going back. When the results finally came in, I opened the envelope with shaking hand. 99.9% probability of paternity. But not mine. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the paper, feeling everything inside me collapse. It was real. The betrayal wasn't just some abstract nightmare I could wake up from. It was written in black and white, undeniable, irreversible. I didn't say a word to Lauren when I got home. I just went upstairs, packed a bag, and walked out the door. The divorce process was fast, not because Lauren wanted to let go, but because I refused to drag it out. I didn't care about the house, the money, or even splitting assets. I just wanted out. I had spent years sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of my family, for the illusion of stability, and I refused to waste another second on a lie. She cried, begged me to reconsider, swore she still loved me. But love wasn't enough. It never had been. I filed for sole custody at first, but my lawyer made it clear that legally I had no claim. She wasn't mine. I had no rights. And that, more than anything, was what broke me. I had held her when she cried, stayed up with her when she was sick, kissed her scraped knees, and taught her how to ride a bike. I had been there for every bedtime story, every first day of school, every small moment that made up a childhood. And now, none of it mattered. I wasn't her father. I had never been. The day I moved out, I didn't say goodbye to her. I couldn't. How do you look at a child you love more than anything and tell them you're not their father anymore? I thought that would be the end of it, the end of my marriage, the end of my life as I had known it. But the fallout was just beginning. Word spread fast. My father was the first to hear, and when he did, everything exploded. 4 years, he had tolerated Nick's behavior. Even after realizing what kind of person he was, he had still helped him, still bailed him out of trouble, still supported him financially when he couldn't hold down a job. But this was too much. When I finally told him everything, I expected him to be angry. I expected yelling, disappointment, maybe even blame. But I didn't expect the silence. My father sat there, gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was eerily calm. He's done. And that was it. Within a week, my father had cut Nick off completely. No more money, no more help, no more second chances. He updated his will, removing Nick from it entirely. Everything that had once been meant for both of us, every investment, every property, every trust, was now solely in my name. Nick tried to fight it, of course. He called, ranted, threatened, demanded that my father reconsider. But it didn't matter. For the first time in his life, there were consequences. The last time I saw him, he looked desperate, furious. You're ruining my life, he spat at me, as if I had been the one to make his choices for him. I just laughed, a cold, empty sound. No, Nick. You did that all on your own. As for Lauren, she tried, for months, to make amends. She called, texted, even showed up at my door once, pleading for another chance. But there was nothing left to salvage. I had given her everything, my trust, my loyalty, my heart. And she had burned it all to the ground. So I let her go. Nick always thought he was untouchable. He had spent his entire life manipulating, lying, and taking whatever he wanted without consequences. Our mother had enabled him, always shielding him from the fallout of his own actions, and even when our father finally saw him for what he was, it had never really mattered, because Nick had never truly suffered for his choices. Until now. After my father cut him off, Nick's life unraveled fast. He had no savings, no steady job, and no idea how to survive without someone else footing the bill. He had always relied on my parents to clean up his messes, to throw him a financial lifeline whenever things got too difficult. But that was over. At first, he was in denial. He thought he could talk his way back into my father's good graces, that he could smooth things over the way he always had. But my father wasn't playing his game anymore. The moment Nick realized he wasn't getting a single cent, his entire demeanor changed. He went from furious to desperate in a matter of weeks. Without money, his life started falling apart. He couldn't afford his apartment, couldn't keep up with car payments, and soon, the people who had once gravitated toward him, the ones who had been happy to be around as long as he was paying for drinks, covering expenses, flashing cash, started disappearing. It didn't take long for him to hit rock bottom. He lost his place, started couch surfing with old friends who quickly grew tired of him. He had never learned to be self-sufficient, never had to budget, never had to work for anything. Without family money propping him up, he was just another guy with nothing to offer. And then, finally, he did something I had been expecting since the moment this all began. He called me. I remember staring at the screen when his name popped up, debating whether I should even answer. After everything he had done, after the destruction he had left in his wake, what could he possibly have to say to me? Against my better judgment, I picked up. There was no arrogance in his voice anymore. No smugness, no condescension. He sounded tired, hollow. Evan, he said, his voice strained. I need help. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. After everything, after betraying me in the worst way possible, after stealing the life I had built and burning it to the ground, he was asking me for help. I didn't say anything right away. I just let the silence stretch between us, waiting to see if he would break it. Come on, man, he continued, his voice shaking slightly. You have everything now. Dad gave you everything. You're fine. But I have nothing. I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. You did this to yourself, Nick. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Yeah, I know. I screwed up. I messed up bad, okay? But I'm your brother. That word meant nothing to me anymore. You stopped being my brother a long time ago, I said, my voice cold. He exhaled sharply, and for the first time in his life, I think he actually understood. There was no coming back from this. No manipulation, no lie, no charming excuse that would fix what he had done. He hesitated, as if he was choking on the words. I don't have anywhere to go. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. A part of me, some deeply ingrained instinct, told me I should feel something for him. That I should offer him something, anything. But I couldn't. I can't help you, Nick. He inhaled sharply, the sound of desperation creeping back into his voice. You won't even let me crash with you for a while? Just until I figure something out? No. There was a long pause, and then, just like that, the desperation turned to rage. Of course, he spat, the old bitterness rising up again. Of course you won't. You've always been like this. You act like you're better than me, but you're not. You just got lucky. I almost laughed at that. Lucky, I repeated, shaking my head. Nick, I worked for everything I have. I built my life. You threw yours away. He muttered something under his breath, then exhaled sharply. You're a selfish piece of... He cut himself off, then let out a dry, humorless chuckle. You know what? Screw you, Evan. Screw you and Dad and everyone else. I didn't even dignify it with a response. I just hung up. That was the last time I spoke to him. I heard through mutual contacts that he bounced around for a while, staying with different people until he burned through every bridge he had left. Eventually, no one wanted anything to do with him. I don't know where he ended up. And honestly, I don't care. Nick spent his whole life destroying everything he touched. Now, for the first time, he had to live with the consequences. It took time, but eventually, I started putting the pieces of my life back together. At first, I felt like I was just going through the motions, forcing myself to wake up, go to work, eat, sleep, and repeat. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the divorce, the loss of the daughter I had raised, sat on my shoulders like an anchor. But I refused to let it drown me. My father was the first one to truly help me pull myself out of it. After cutting Nick off, he reached out more than he ever had before. We started talking regularly, meeting up for dinners, even working on some investment projects together. He told me he regretted not seeing Nick for what he really was sooner, that he wished he had done more for me when I was younger. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had his full attention, his full respect, and maybe even his approval. Financially, things improved more than I had ever expected. My father had removed Nick from his will completely, which meant that everything he had planned to split between us now belonged to me. At first, I didn't know how to feel about it. The money, the properties, the investments, it was more than I had ever imagined having. But my father made one thing clear. I had earned this, while Nick had thrown away every opportunity he had been given. Instead of dwelling on it, I put my energy into work. I started making smarter financial moves, investing in things that would grow long-term, rather than just sitting on what I had. I built something for myself, something that had nothing to do with Nick, nothing to do with Lauren, and everything to do with securing my own future. Therapy became part of my routine too. At first, I hated it. I didn't want to talk about my past, about my childhood, about the choices I had made or the pain that still sat beneath my skin like a wound that refused to heal. But over time, I started to understand myself better. I started to see why I had stayed with Lauren after the first betrayal, why I had spent years trying to be the bigger person, why I had clung so desperately to the idea of family, even when it was hurting me. I had spent my entire life being the one who cleaned up the messes, the one who held things together while everyone else took what they wanted. Now, for the first time, I was living for myself. As for Nick and Lauren, I heard through mutual connections that they had ended up together. It wasn't surprising. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was convenience, maybe it was just two broken people clinging to the wreckage of what they had done. Either way, they were now living together, raising the daughter I once thought was mine. The first time I saw a picture of them, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret. Just emptiness. They had built a life on betrayal, on lies, and I had no doubt that sooner or later, it would come crashing down around them. I don't miss them. I don't miss the weight of carrying a family that was never really mine. I don't miss Lauren's empty apologies or Nick's smug manipulations. I have my own life now, my own future, and for the first time in a long time I am finally at peace.